to reiterate the success that a small island-based nation focusing largely on financial services can have if it is deregulated. Between 1991 and 2010, GDP in Hong Kong grew by nearly 200%. In the same period in the UK, it grew by only 50%. There are questions there of how do we solve this problem? Is it actually a problem that, especially if we're going to tackle debt, isn't there always somebody else who can pay the money for it? We've certainly seen in our political and media narrative in recent months, the bankers caused this crisis, let's hit the bankers hard to pay it back. Apart from the innumeracy of the point about bankers, you could tax every banker's bonus 100%, and even if no banker left the country, you would be absolutely nowhere near curing the hole in our public finances. If we were to look at high earners as a whole, are we sensible to be taxing people who are relatively successful in this country at a high rate? And it strikes me that there are two reasons why you might wish to do this. One is to simply raise revenue that you can spend on people that you identify as more deserving sorts. The other is that some belief that those who earn more, who are more financially successful, need to pick up a greater share of the burden. But if we look at the United Kingdom's approach to income tax and the top rate of income tax over recent years, we find something really quite spectacular. And I'm not measuring here the amount of money raised by income tax. I'm going to measure the relative burden. How much of the proportion of income tax is paid for by the extremely rich or the extremely successful, the moderately successful, and by everybody else. Now, back in the pre-Thatcher era, our top rate of income tax was 83%. There are some cases where you can argue it actually got a lot higher than that, up to 98%, but 83% was the top rate of income tax. And what this graph shows you, the blue wedge towards the top right, that is the contribution to the overall income tax pie that was picked up by the top 1% of earners. The next slice, that rather burgundy section, that's what the next 9% contributed. So the blue and the burgundy put together, that was the contribution as a proportion of the highest earning 10% of the population, and that yellow slice is what the remaining 90% contributed. When we saw the top rate of income tax cut under the Conservative government in the 1980s to 60%, that's actually the change that you get. Not huge, but surprisingly, counterintuitively, the proportion, as you can see by that blue slice, getting a little bigger, is actually that the top 1% start contributing a higher proportion of the overall receipts. Probably not much difference between the total contributed by the top 10% there, but the super successful, that top 1% contributing a higher share of the burden. And then, although the 50% rates now come in, when we had a top rate of 40%, that's what happened. You now have more than half of income tax receipts being generated by the top 10% of the population. In broad terms, when the 40% rate came in, the highest 1% of earners contribute about 23% of all income tax receipts. And the next 9%, or the total with the next 9%, comes to a bit over 50%, about 53% of all income tax receipts. So if you are concerned not just by sort of the economic drive to become a vigorous capitalist economy like Hong Kong, but if you are concerned about the equitable division of who should pay what to whatever state we have, however big that state may be, then it seems to me that this evidence actually suggests that by lowering rates of taxation, you can actually expect those with the broadest shoulders to contribute an even higher proportion of the overall take. But the problem that we have got at the moment, of course, is not simply where do we get the tax from in order to pay for the various public services that we expect our state to provide, but to what extent have we provided ourselves with more services and goods than the tax revenues that we have succeeded in bringing in? So the overall scale of spending that we have engaged in over and beyond the revenues we've brought in is spectacular. There is good evidence to suggest now that the taxes, the tax rates that we have in the United Kingdom are, if you like, at or even beyond their maximum. Art Laffer's famous Laffer curve, I'm sure, will be known to most of you. It is difficult to apply it to each and every tax in the United Kingdom, but the concept went something like this: if your tax on something, let's say work, is 0%, then your tax revenues will be 0. If your tax rate is 100%, your tax revenues will also be 0 because nobody will work. So somewhere between 0 and 100% is the optimal level of tax if your aim is to maximise government revenue. And I think that the slides I showed you, albeit only on the top rate of income tax, and there are many different taxes than that, that's not anything like a majority of the income that comes in, shows that in many ways we may actually now be on the wrong side of the Laffer curve. We may actually be taxing people at a rate so high that our receipts are not even maximised. But if we assume that the government's got it bang on right and our receipts are maximised, that increasing taxes further would see diminishing revenues, then we have this colossal debt and deficit problem. The debt being what Martin Durkin highlights there. That includes in it, to be frank and clear about it, because Durkin is trying to explain this in a shocking and rather polemical fashion. In roundabout terms, $1 trillion is the official national debt, but you have to, on any sensible analysis, build in the liabilities that we have and we will have to pay out. For example, to those in the public sector who have pensions that are guaranteed based on their final salary scheme. So once you start making judgments about how long the average public sector worker will live, what their life expectancy is, then you can have an idea of what our ongoing liability is. And £5 trillion, this doesn't actually include the banks in it, seems to be considered widely to be a fair figure. In roundabout terms, that's £80,000 for every man, woman and child in the United Kingdom. So given that taxation is at the max, given that we have already decided to transfer £5 trillion of expenditure that we've spent on us to those people who are not yet of voting age, indeed to a large number of people who have been neither born nor conceived yet, you might understand the context in which the coalition is seeking to cut back on public spending. But again, despite the sound and fury that we've had in politics and in the media about it, the coalition's cuts are pretty modest. In real terms, if that total pie represents what the government was spending when the coalition government took office, then that small burgundy piece is the amount that is being cut, about 3.5% in real terms. That's based on a number of different predictions, not the IEA's, I hasten to add. You do have to factor in a range of projections on inflation and the like, but it won't be much out, about 3.5%. Put another way, for every pound the government is spending today, it will still be spending in real terms about 97 pence at the end of this Parliament. It is cutting expenditure overall by about 0.7% a year. So I think that we face a difficult and a challenging decision, and indeed a choice. We have, in my view, not just the risks associated with a sovereign debt crisis that we are close to seeing being played out on the streets of Athens and potentially affecting other countries as well, where there is a moral problem, I believe a moral outrage about the amount of money that generations of voting age have spent on themselves, expecting the bill to be picked up by their children. We have seen the size of the public sector grow to near on 50%, one of the high peaks around about now, dwarfed admittedly by World War I and World War II, but I think we can count those as exceptions. We have a taxation system at its max, and we have what are, frankly, the mildest possible cuts that are barely worth the name. Now, I should say that that pie does not tell the entire story. One of the reasons that there won't be as much to spend on goods and services in 5 years' time is our debt repayments increase substantially. And of course, the government has decided, for their own reasons or for political reasons, to treat different departments and different fields of expenditure in different ways. So it is not as if every single piece of government spending in the United Kingdom is being cut by 3.5%. International aid, for example, will increase in real terms. The National Health Service will increase in real terms. Some departments and areas of expenditure, usually the smaller ones, are actually finding cuts of around 20 or 25%. Those are real and meaningful. But in terms of the overall budget and the overall profit and loss, the balance sheet at the end of it, that is the sum total of what the coalition is doing. I think we need to make a much bolder choice and embrace the reality of the success that has happened in those countries that have gone down the most free market route since the Second World War. Hong Kong being a shining example, South Korea not being a bad example either. In those countries, we see the proportion of government expenditure at somewhere around the 25% level of GDP, not the 45% level that we have allowed it to get to in the United Kingdom. In fact, by the end of this Parliament, for all the screaming that has been done, the national debt will have grown by £400 billion. It is not the debt that the coalition government are paying down, it is the deficit. An analogy would be if you are irresponsibly going out and spending on your credit card in the shops of London every Saturday more than you are earning, what the coalition government is effectively doing in terms of its fiscal discipline is to say, well, keep going out and spending more than you are earning every Saturday, but rather than spending £500 more than you're earning this Saturday, only spend £400 more than you're earning next, or £300 more than you are earning next. And by 5 or 6 Saturdays' time, maybe we'll have got you back to actually spending what you are bringing in. So over the course of the Parliament, by the end of it, it is the Chancellor Exchequer's hope that the books will balance for the final year of the coalition government. They will only spend what they have brought in. But in the years leading up to the next election, 400 billion will have been added to the colossal figure that Martin Durkin outlined for you. The UK in fiscal freedom, in terms of the size of the state, 129th according to the Heritage Index, 156th in terms of public spending, 93rd in monetary freedom, 56th in labour freedom. This is not one of the more free market capitalist countries in the world anymore, at least not on those metrics. Hong Kong now, as I had said, basically a third richer again than we are, having been us being 3 times as rich as Hong Kong in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. And the reason that we are drowning in debt is not because of a lack of state intervention, but because of a lack of freedom. I think that the evidence, the empirical evidence and the economic theory is pretty clear. If you choose to go down a very deregulated, very free market, very capitalist path, you yield spectacular results over the long run. The more you go for government spending, higher taxes, often not even bringing you in as much revenue as you might have with a lighter touch, the more you edge towards, I'm only going to say edge towards, but edge towards the sort of numbers that we have seen in North Korea. The United Kingdom is neither Hong Kong nor North Korea. But if you look at either of those two countries, it is clear to me which path we should decisively follow. And that should be, if we care about the wealth of ourselves and our fellow citizens on a day-to-day basis, let alone the inheritance of our children, then that is a far more free market, much smaller state path than anyone in the coalition government has even conceived of in their wildest dreams. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and thank you for listening.